Larry Dignan, 3 new iPhones this year. Three. And the price seems to go higher and higher ever. Still, it seems like Apple might be trying to extract more money out of an ever shrinking customer base.
Well, I don't know about shrinking, but there's certainly no growth there. So the way I kind of look at this launch, which they're all supposed to look like the iPhone 10, and basically the gist of it is they have no growth and they're not going to get growth. So it's all about extracting money from that current user base. And I think this is a theme with all of smartphones, not just Apple, but it's all about selling services and things like that. So if you look at Apple, the iPhone, these new iPhones, they're going to come out with new specs, they're going to look great, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, they're basically razors, and Apple's going to be selling you the monthly subscriptions to Apple Music, iCloud, all that good stuff. And that's the game now, right? The game is really, it's the same old lock-in strategy that tech has had forever. And it's just Apple's so massive that they can sort of spin this thing up. The only place where the iPhone as a razor kind of falls over is the price. They're still extracting a nice price tag out of these things. And it just creates this monetary juggernaut that's fairly unstoppable at this point.
All right, so Larry, you wrote a great story on ZDNet and using the services metaphor, or the razor blade metaphor rather, for Apple services. They do charge a lot of money for that iPhone, but they're also getting a lot of money for their service industry. However, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are way ahead of the pack. Can Apple catch up?
They can. And the other thing is Apple's services businesses, the way they define it with Apple Care, Apple Music. So it's the kitchen sink approach when it comes to services. But if you add it all up, it's on a run rate of about $40 billion a year. So yeah, their razors are still pretty damn expensive, but they're making a lot on the services too. So even though they're not necessarily, they may not grow units, and they may not grow the customer base per se, they can extract more and more money out of you with the services. So it's just fascinating to watch. It's sort of like a capitalist dream. The wild card here is, like you mentioned, Google. Android devices are cheaper and cheaper, and that's also a services model, except Google reaps most of the benefits, right? Because it's advertising. And when we heard Samsung came out with their Galaxy Note 9, and they talked about how they have to develop services and develop monetization. Well, Apple's already there. The challenge for Apple is pricing those razors in a way that you could maybe get more customers, or especially abroad. Like if you look at the IDC figures, Huawei's past Apple. So there's competition coming from the bottom, and we'll see if they can develop that services sort of strategy too.
And they are using the cloud, but a consumer cloud. Is there any chance that Apple would move into the B2B space and serve like Amazon does, like Microsoft does, like Google does, serve the business audience in addition to their consumer base?
It's pretty doubtful. The way Apple plays in the B2B space largely through the devices. And all that happened because workers started bringing in their own devices. And that's how Apple got popular in the enterprise. I would never rule it out though, because Tim Cook is, his past life was at IBM. He's a supply chain guru. I mean, he's kind of the guy where Steve Jobs was the genius. Tim Cook's kind of the moneymaker, right? The inventories are managed well, the supply chain's managed well, the devices are managed okay, and then he develops a services thing. Right? So as far as the financial mojo here, Tim Cook's a B2B guy. But I don't think he's going to go there and try to do that.
There's a percolating backlash against Google and Apple services, at least with developers who sell applications in the App Store on both platforms. Is this a real threat to the business of Google and Apple, or is this a temporary rebellion?
I think it's a rebellion among the app developers that have scale, right? So Fortnite's the big one, right? Fortnite's like, I'm not going on Google Play because I don't want to play. I don't want to pay that commission when people will just download Android from our site, and they can do that because they're huge. right? And it's got its own momentum. The average app developer who's just looking to try to reach an audience, you're going to pay that 30%. Because where it gets interesting though is the companies that do have that scale, they're almost going to have they're going to need a separate deal to stay on Google Play. Like if you're Netflix, why would you pay Google a percentage of anything or Apple a percentage of anything? Because people are going to find you on your own, right? So I think that's the difference. They're sort of the one percenters, so to speak, where they're massive, they have scale, they have their own customer base. You don't necessarily need the app stores at that point. Everybody else, you're paying that 30%, and you're going to like it because you have no choice.
Steve Jobs once mocked the stylus with the rollout of the first iPhone. Of course, Samsung has had incredible success with the Note device and the embed stylus. Apple is now expected to include Apple Pencil support with the new iPhones. Does business care? Does this matter?
I've been trying to figure that one out for years because I use the Note. And I use it because I like the stylus. I jot things down. It's a reporter's notebook. Although I don't see many of my colleagues running around doing that, other than like journalist types. I think where the stylus could be interesting is if Apple Pencil becomes a thing with the iPhones, then it's probably going to popularize that as a use case for it. They'll come up with something, right? But as we've seen over and over and over again, Apple can come out with something that's been a technology that's been around for years and somehow make it cool. And Samsung can only take the stylus so far. So I could almost see, if you see your 10-year-old or 11-year-old going, "Oh, look, a pen, I can write on an iPhone," then they accomplished their job. But it will be comical though, because there's so many companies ahead on the stylus thing that Apple could just run away with that thing and make it cool.
All right, finally, we will see 3 different sizes. The large size iPhone is almost the size of the now forgotten iPad mini. Great productivity device, right?
Right. But the weird part here, and this is where we have to see how this plays out, the inexpensive one is supposed to be the big one. And I don't know if that's a productivity crowd, so to speak. But I think they're going to run into some trouble with the portfolio, right? Because you have two OLED screens that'll be high end, and then you're going to have a big device that's LCD, and it's going to put a value on this. Like, what's the screen worth to you? So that's the thing to really watch for me, is just that whole portfolio approach. Like, is there going to be confusion, right? Because they're all going to look like the iPhone 10, and they're all going to have Face ID. And I'm not sure how you're going to distinguish between them. I mean, maybe they'll do the old trick where they chucked in the colors and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I don't, is that worth $400 or whatever the price difference is? We'll have to wait and see. But I almost see that. I see some price confusion, and I see some branding confusion between the three for sure.